and had to weave an impromptu grass skirt so she could scuttle back into the village. It takes many days to make a proper grass skirt, so she had to sneak in with this little bit of, vine around her. Anyway, before they split, they made an agreement to have another rendezvous the next month at the night of the full moon. And while they were lying on the beach making love on that second night of the full moon, up crawls a turtle getting ready to nest with a fragment of grass skirt tangled around one flipper. And that's how Palauans are supposed to have initially discovered this lunar cycle of the turtles. And as one of my students commented when I told them this could have been the world's first tag and recapture experiment. In Australia, there's a fish called barramundi. It's like the Nile perch. For some of you who work in Africa, you'll be familiar with it. It's a big fish, it's a fantastic sports fish, and it tastes great, and it's important commercially and recreationally. Now, there's been an argument among biologists for some years about whether it spawns in coastal waters or whether it goes upstream to spawn. A colleague of mine showed unmistakably that in Torres Strait, I won't bother telling you where it is because it doesn't matter, spawned along the coast. I went several years later to work with some Aborigines in the coast of northern Arnhem Land, a few hundred miles away, and I was interviewing them about a lot of different things, but one of the questions I asked them is where did barramundi spawn, because I knew they knew a lot about barramundi, and they said they spawn upstream. I thought, wait a minute, it's been proven that they spawn in coastal waters. This is funny. This guy that I was interviewing sounded pretty like he knew what he was talking about, but this was really a sour note in the information I was getting. This guy was wrong. And I asked a couple of other people, and they said the same thing. And finally I brought it up to the group, and they said, essentially, with all due respect to your scientific colleague, perhaps they do spawn in coastal waters over where he works, but here they spawn upstream. Well, another colleague of mine, about 2 years later, was working in the area on barramundi and discovered that in that area they spawned upstream, and we found what the explanation was. We were making the assumption that barramundi chose a geographic area, a coastal versus upstream, a geographic area in which to spawn, but barramundi choose a particular salinity, particular saltiness of the water to spawn. Now, in the area where they spawned offshore, there's a huge river. It's a Sepik, not the Sepik, I've forgotten the name of the river, but anyway, it's a Papua New Guinea river that has more outflow, has more volume discharge than all Australian rivers put together. And therefore, you have to go a long way along the coast before you can find water of 28 parts per thousand salinity. Pure seawater is about 35 parts. Now, in northern Arnhem Land, where the Aborigines were that told me that they spawned upstream, this was an area where the rivers were small and where the gradient was very slight, so that tides washed salt water way up the river because there was such a slight slope. And to find salinity of 28 parts per thousand, you had to go way up the river to find it, to find this dilution, this appropriate mixture of salt and fresh water. So the Aborigines were right, and we thought we'd solved the problem when the first set of biologists showed that the fish spawned along the coast. But here was a case where I was really quite skeptical that the fishermen knew what they were talking about, and they did indeed. I think I better skip quite a bit here. I would like to stress the fact before I end that I don't want to give you an inflated impression of traditional knowledge, insofar as it's really valuable, it's encyclopedic, it's dying out rapidly because young people aren't interested, but it's not infallible by any means. For example, I was working with a group in the Solomon Islands who told me when the groupers in their area came together to spawn, and I found their information was remarkably detailed and precise to a degree that I'd never encountered before, and I spent a whole week on the spawning grounds following from hour to hour exactly what happened. And everything happened the way I said it would. But I asked them if they'd ever seen these groupers actually spawn. And they said, no, we haven't seen that. Subsequently, I discovered that they had seen it. And what happened was, to back up for a minute and talk about another fish, parrotfish are another reef fish that eats coral. Now, coral is mostly calcium carbonate with a thin film of tissue over it. So when they crunch with their teeth, they crunch the coral, most of what they get is chalk and just a little bit of tissue. They have to eat an awful lot of coral, and they have to eject the waste rather frequently. And so you see parrotfish typically on the reef, day in and day out, venting stuff that looks like the consistency and color and shape of talcum powder, and they do it about every 5 minutes. And so the fishermen were familiar with this behavior. But when a fish spawns and releases its milt and its sperm, it looks about the same. And these fishermen had seen this behavior when the groupers spawned. They sort of twirled together, and then the water became milky. They didn't realize that was spawning because they didn't see any penis, and they didn't know what external fertilization was, so they didn't recognize it as spawning. So they understood all this behavioral material, but they didn't realize they'd seen the ultimate event because they thought the fish, to how they described it, were just shitting, was the way they described it to me. So there are times when you can get fouled up by, often the observations are correct, but the interpretation may not always be accurate. The other thing that I caution you against is there have been an awful lot of publications recently, books come out on how traditional peoples are in tune with nature. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them had a conservation ethic, some of them didn't. Some groups didn't have a conservation ethic because they lived in an environment that supplied them with so much of everything they needed that they never realized there was no limit, because there was no limit functionally. They always had more than they needed. But in addition to that, the profit motive seems to destroy this traditional conservation ethic where it does exist. Once you get a few people in the culture who see they can make a fast buck, they make a fast buck, and things start to develop, and within a generation or so, things start to go downhill. So this traditional feeling of harmony with nature is not something you can depend upon in modern generations. A good example of it is the countries around the Gulf that are oil rich. Now the Quran, as I was showing when I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago, is a remarkable compendium, or contains a remarkable compendium of ecological advice and wisdom. It is vastly superior to the Bible in this regard. It sounds like it was written yesterday because it is so precise, so sound in its ecological advice about how to treat and respect your environment. But and as you probably all know, the people who the Muslims are they pray 5 times a day, and they adhere very closely to the prescriptions of the Quran in theory, but they are ruining their environment as fast as their petrodollars will allow them to. And the fact that the Quran is such an important document and guide, it doesn't seem to carry much weight when it comes time to, when you've got the cash to wreck your environment in the name of progress. So, on this kind of expertise I'm talking about, I guess I better finish. I was going to tell you a good story about Saudi Arabia, but it's past time to quit. This expertise is completely lost in some places now. In Nauru, it's gone totally. None of the people there fish. There used to be marvelous fishermen back in the 1920s and 30s. In Hawaii, it's almost gone. In New Zealand, it's mostly gone. In many other places, it's narrowed down to the memory capacity of just a very few people, and as they die, the young people lose it. They're not interested in it by and large. They don't see its importance. Many of them are going off to universities and coming back thinking, what do my people in the villages know? These unsophisticated people, they may be nice, but they're ignorant, so their knowledge is not worth learning. So they don't learn it. So we are allowing an enormous, encyclopedic squared legacy to vanish if we don't try to collect as much of it as we can while the time permits. Already it's much too late for some areas. Thank you. There's time for a couple of questions. Anybody I'm sorry, did you hear
How
me?
would aquaculture factor into this scheme of issues?
It depends entirely on how it's done. Aquaculture is the wave of the future, there's no doubt about it. And the day will come within another 2 or 3 decades, perhaps within 1 decade, when we get more fish from aquaculture than we do from conventional fisheries. But aquaculture has destroyed a lot of natural production. For example, the most blatant example is the clearing of mangrove swamps along the coast for the growing of shrimp and other fish. Now, the mangroves are the nursery areas for a great many wild fish. And when you destroy the mangroves, the baby fish don't have any playpens anymore. There's no place to go. And as a result, and shrimp also. And as a result, the offshore catch of wild fish goes down. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So there's an example of aquaculture that doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Also, aquaculture tends to concentrate a lot of money in the hands of the few wealthy people who can buy up these coastal lands, whereas the wild fisheries tend to be open to anyone who's got a dugout canoe in developing countries. So it all depends on how it's done, whether it's good or bad.
Anybody else?
You comment on the Muslims, the Quran, and the relationship with the environment. Can you explain a little bit what you mean?
Yes, I can. I worked for a little while with the Saudi Arabia Ministry for the Environment and for Wildlife and Development. And they told me that a great many of the native mammals, the cats, and the animals, a little bit like dingoes, dog-like animals, some of the hawks and eagles, as far as they could tell, were either extraordinarily rare or were extinct because of overhunting by people who went out and just shot them down for fun, now that they had jeeps and machine guns and could do it easily. There is one area where the groundwater is being pumped out to grow wheat. The cost of pumping that groundwater out means the wheat costs 5 times as much as wheat does normally that's grown for the international market. But Saudi Arabia has been given an award by the United Nations because it ships this wheat off to countries that need wheat, and therefore is being looked upon as a good citizen. But it's paid 5 times the normal cost to grow this wheat by pumping up groundwater, and the groundwater is going down at the rate of between 5 and 10, the water table, between 5 and 10 meters per year. And this is fossil groundwater. That is to say, it's water that was made from rain that fell on the average of 10,000 years ago, which means that once you pump it down, it ain't going to fill back up again anytime soon. So they are mining a valuable resource unthinkingly. And these are just 2 examples of blatant destruction of the local environment, because when you got lots of money, what the hell?
I shall make a correction to that has nothing to do with Islam. It's maybe the behavior of the Arabs in Saudi Arabia. If you travel a little bit far away, maybe to Yemen.
No, I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. I didn't say that behavior was because of Islam. I said it was despite Islam, which I said the Quran is a remarkably fine document in terms of the ecological wisdom it contains. But people who pump out the groundwater at that rate and destroy their wildlife are ignoring the teaching of the Quran.
Okay, well, we appreciate very much stopping here with us at Sea Garden, Iowa State, and Route to Virginia. And wish you well as you head out to the Pew Foundation to fellow readers. Thanks for sharing.